Civilizations crumble and ideologies align. This is the Civilization Battle Royale X, Season 4, Episode 29, The Dictator Plague. Hello all, I am Rose, your narrator once again. There's no reason to hang around here, so let's get started. This week's map from Sonic Fan shows off the colors the cylinder is painted in. I wonder how they will change today. Orange brings us another installment of Pacific Pals. You know, for being called pals, the Civs never seem to like each other very much. Singapore illustrates that even top powers can bleed if you hit them in the right place. Thanks as always to the donators who help keep the servers running and the game alive. This week we welcome first-time supporter Buzzercap to the board, actually belated as the shoutout was scheduled for last week but got lost in the delayed release, and It's Truck Month back to the list from previous seasons. Thank you both for helping us out. Pueblo continues its meteoric fall through the ranks, and the question of this episode is less about whether they'll lose more cities versus how much more their loss will be. We open the episode proper with Tiwanaku desperately flipping Atacama back to their control. Things look bleak, however, as units from both Ecuador and Bora Bora rampage practically uncontested through the Andes. The Carmatian and Vijayanagara navies clash in the open Arabian Sea. They use different ships, Krishna Devaraya fielding a mix of privateers and frigates while Abu Tahir al-Janabi prefers galleons, but they seem equally matched. News of the war filters through to the nations of West Africa, who declare war as well in support of the Carmatians. Baksawu Shaliko flips between the Osage and Tule as the Yellowknives look on, bombing all the cities on the front. The Selkups capture Pavlodar, putting an end to the Bukharan outpost. It's not a fun time to be a Puebloan. Planes, a new and terrifying weapon, hum daily from the north, dropping explosives on all the cities along the new border. The Yellowknife cavalry also rides rampant through the countryside, burning anything they can find. The latest reports from the north suggest Oke Owinge has fallen, like so many others. Getting reports that so many others are attacking Vijayanagara, Yagan decides to join in, eyeing the close to defenseless Antarctic colony of Gadag. It happened slowly with the Nivkh. Flailing after the losses to the Tule, support for the ruling party grew worse and worse. Meanwhile, all the people could hear from the south and west was that Goguryeo was more powerful, more productive, more happy. Ever so gradually, the people stopped caring whether Tutin from down the street was a councillor, or whether Chavark from Okha had a seat in the government. They needed someone better, someone who was above the rabble. And in the lands of the Nivkh, there was only one person you could always rely on. Piece by piece, more and more executive power came to rest in the hands of Umu the Immortal, until, one day, just like it was so many millennia ago, he was the sole ruler of Tyr. Royal Hungary's units overflow their feeble borders, exploring some citadels in the south of France. The English Navy once again sails into Emerita, and it doesn't look like Leovigild can take it back for at least a turn. Palencia is also taking significant damage from Sierra Leone, and Rakopolis has been burnt to ashes. Singapore's lightning attack takes 4 of the 6 cities of Hawaii. Once a valuable strategic link between Asia and America, now that the nations of the cylinder don't have to fear the deep ocean, the fate of these islands seems to be tossed back and forth between those who want them. Emboldened by their success against a top power, Singapore joins up with the Khoshuts to try and take down Siam. They might have the objective advantage, but most of Siam's cities aren't too accessible by sea, so it might prove to be a tougher nut to crack than Singapore is expecting. On another front of this war, Carmatian units are streaming in a line toward the Vijayanaгаran cities of the Seychelles Islands. Belgaum is beginning to take damage, but even ignoring the backup fleet to the west, it has several ranged units to chip down the invaders. Pueblo continues to falter. A few units take back Oke Oinge, but only peace will save this flagging empire from constant aerial bombardment. Bora Bora and Palawa make peace, no territory exchanged. Puni can now focus on taking as much as possible from Tiwanaku. Trondur stacks a fleet of bombers in the far west of his empire. Is this just deterrence, or a sign of future plans? Goguryeo takes back Abikuyu, and their ships seem to outnumber those of the invaders now. Depressed by the way his empire has been carved into 4 detached parts by his neighbors, Machno recruits the Pet Shop Boys to distract him. Ndongo inflicts more damage on the Eswatini cities. Now they just need to take them, and not just back out like they have before. Singapore's army apparently isn't quite as ready to fight as its leader was to declare war. Siam's settled city of Chantaburi, long under the yoke of the South, looks to soon be reunited with its founder. For their part in the coalition, the Hoshuts look to be doing nothing. Great work. Palencia's health drops further, aided by the sheer pain of England and its UA existing. Sierra Leone also has a settler on the way to replace Rhacopolis mid-war. Iko Iki recruits Tchaikovsky. At least the single-minded followers will have some nice music to listen to as they continue to fall behind their neighbors. The Yellowknives take back on their inevitable march south, with the soldiers inspired by Aram Khachaturian. Great musician, Yellowknife, great musician. In case you hadn't noticed, he's a great musician. They also take Kawaika, with Puebloan resistance fast evaporating. 3 of the tiles around Taos are already occupied by Yellowknife invaders. Meanwhile, in the similarly disintegrating empire of Tiwanaku, Ecuadorian forces have captured Pariti, cutting Ojo off from the rest of its allies. Tiwanaku only has 4 military units in this entire image, and none of them are in the isolated Ojo. It happened suddenly in Ecuador. One tepid morning, the civil servants and court attendants left the caravan convoy and headed to the government office in Lucumata, where the country was being directed from for the purposes of the Tiwanaku War. It was always quiet in Lucumata, far too many buildings left for the dwindling population. But today, it felt somehow even quieter than usual. One carman nervously slid open the plastic door, only to be greeted with a disquieting sight. The immortal Moreno, of late representing a capital suburb in Parliament, stood alone. The other members of Parliament have been dismissed. I have no need for them anymore. I dragged this civilization out of the dirt with my own 2 hands, and it seems I will need to do so again. By the evening, the news circulated throughout Ecuador that the sole exalted leader would now be, and indeed always had been, Gabriel Moreno. Goguryeo's army continues making its way through the mountains to the final 3 cities left to Shang. Erlito has flipped back to Shang, but is in the red. Daji, unwilling to accept reality, submerges herself in vice, plunging the temporary capital of Dawanko into resistance. Zia also falls back to Goguryeo. Singapore only has 3 military units left in the area, and has much more pressing problems at home to worry about than these far-flung islands. The Osage and Taino end a war that neither side seems to have been fighting anyway. Pahuska has more pressing war fronts, and Aguebana needs to catch up on beauty sleep. Chantaburi returns to its founder and rightful owner, after having passed around between other nations. The Siamese army is even pressing on Samut Songkhram, another original city of theirs, although Singapore is now advancing its superior navy. Cheering on the carving up of Tiwanaku is Antonio Carlos Jobim, a pioneer of Bossa Nova. On the mainland, Tiwanaku now has fewer military units than it does cities, with its remaining territory looking to fall equally between Bora Bora and Ecuador. In a fell swoop, Akaicho rides triumphant into Taos and Ha'aku, kicking Popey into Baja California. This also secures Akaicho the capital lead. It feels wrong somehow, but yes, nobody else on the cylinder owns more than 2 original capitals. Bolim adds another wonder to his collection. This one apparently increases the effectiveness of defensive buildings in all of the Wagi cities, as if they wouldn't be enough of a pain to invade anyway. Mount Hagen itself has a staggering defense of 138. The Karmatians and Vijayanagara make peace before either side can really get anywhere. We get a shot of the Senecan Empire. It might not be the most modern army, but it is decently large. They could probably make a dent in Osage if they wanted to. Meanwhile, for having such impressive stats, Gogorio's core is surprisingly empty. Such wide swaths of land, devoid of units, are just begging for an underdog to walk into them. Only one of the Hawaiian Islands is left in Singapore's hands. With no defenders left and under bombardment from the Goguryeo Air Force, it seems destined to fall too. Sabah Emmet recruits Georges Eugene Haussmann, known for a renovation of Paris under Napoleon. Sabah certainly needs a renovation of some kind if they want to get anywhere in this game. Palencia falls to Sierra Leone, the green invaders cementing themselves as a cross-continental power. However, they set the city alight, and if their happiness hasn't improved since the start of the episode, it will burn to the ground. Naval units from both Sierra Leone and England are also closing in on Barcino. In a desperate counter, a ragged Popey hoists Pueblo's flag in Taos once again, defiant of the constant devastation from the skies. It will not last. Looking at the sidebar, I don't think it lasted. With the Puebloan capital practically secure, the Yellowknives now turn their gaze to the Osage intrusions, taking back both Chichuche and Baaxuaxilico. Big Bend falls back to Ndongo, but Mbabane has recovered its damage. Move your units in, Nzinga. Javaraganak makes peace with Pahuska. Pitufik is now the only one of the once numerous Tule exclaves left. We also observe the worrying sparsity of the Tule core. That said, the only civilization who could even move against them is the Yellowknives, and they're otherwise occupied at the moment. Moving their army to the front, Singapore has fended off the Siamese attack and is now making some offensive progress against Ratchapuri and Bakyang. Chantaburi, at least, looks secure enough to remain Siamese for now. For their part in the coalition, the Khoshutes look to be doing nothing. Great work. The powers of North America meet, and even in the midst of bloody war, they agree that anarchy is a dangerous ideology that needs to be exterminated. The Karmatians and Bavaria, trying to make some new friends, unfortunately mistranslate the memo and declare war on Royal Hungary instead. Ludwig finds himself at war with his old foe Elizabeth once again. He surrounds Chete on almost all relevant sides. It might not be the most impressive army, but even this can probably take a single city. We see that Taos did indeed fall again last turn. Ha'aku and Okeowinge are back under Pueblo's control for now, but their days are numbered. Down in Pampacoani, they don't even know they're at war. They fish and farm and make merry, and think that the lack of communication means that the capital just forgot about them. They may see strange boats off in the distant sea, and be woken occasionally by a strange orange glow in the north, but nothing could happen in sleepy Pampacoani. Guangaito chooses to bring mostly triplanes to the front. An interesting choice, seeing as his victims don't have any tech that would require that, but maybe he just wants to flex. Meanwhile, Rikyo Maya, realizing she's too close to maybe doing something, pieces out with Machno. Whew, close one. Tiwanaku's final units in the east are vanquished, Bora Bora triumphantly claiming both Huancane and Pucara, denying Ecuador the opportunity. It even looks like Puni is the one closing in on Ojo on the west. The Visigoths make peace with England, giving up on Emerita but saving Barcino for now. They also kick Sierra Leone back out of Palencia, although there are a lot of hungry privateers in the Mediterranean looking for a chance at glory. Speaking of Sierra Leone, in the corner they settle point in the ruins of Racopolis. Goguryeo marches back into Erlito, and it seems like they'll stay there. Dawenko has been bombed into the deep red already, but it'll be a little while until the land forces catch up. Daji uses the dwindling city stores for her decadence, plugging her ears to try and muffle the noise of the planes. Ignoring the Bavarian units closing in, the Vampire Queen sends a lone crossbow contingent on a hopeless mission to retake Casa. Is this slide the same as the last one we saw of this war? I think it might be. Maybe Ana Nzinga and Labotsi Beni Mdaluli are stuck in a strange time loop, unable to escape, meeting over and over again, only able to rely on each other. They slowly realize that the only way to escape the endless now is to... Sorry, where was I? A lone Oldan guard retakes Baxua Shaliko for the Osage. Unfortunately, the pikeman replacement will not last against the guns of the north. Singapore's boats rush into Ratchaburi, almost cutting Bakyang off from the rest of the Siamese Empire. Elsewhere, the fighting is still fierce for now, Chantaburi even able to heal. The Siamese army is disappearing, however, with the north very empty if someone wanted to attack there. Whoever that someone might be, we know who it isn't, because for their part in the coalition, the Kossuths look to be doing nothing. Great work. Angry over the recent failure of his Selkup invasion, Galdan Khan recruits Vercingetorix. Perhaps he should be looking at the softer target to his west? Never mind. The nations of the world meet, deciding that Gushi is an eyesore and they should all declare war on him. Laughing, Galdan Khan hits the declare war button, but too late realizes that he still holds that ill-gotten gain from far too long ago. Lhasa, its inhabitants having forgotten they were ever part of the Kossuths, find itself surrounded by enemies. Not content to stop yet, Akaicho continues to march his forces southward, the new capital of Kewa his next target. The Pueblo navy is big, but I can't see any melee ships, so all they can do is delay the inevitable. A massive Noongar attack force is making its way across the Indian Ocean. Its goal is presumably the distant lands of Vijayanagara. Bora Bora snubs Ecuador again, taking Ojo. The Tiwanaku capital is ringed by Puni's units and dropping in health. Hopefully he can also join the 3 Capital Club this episode. Every day the strange red-painted ships draw closer to Pampacoani. The fishers wave, but receive no reply. Regardless, life goes on. Nothing happens in sleepy Pampacoani. The Norwegian admiral, the Thunder Shield, sails in from the north. Bora Bora seems to be ignoring the Tiwanaku Antarctic colonies. Perhaps they are rightly judged as having too little value compared to the juicy mainland. Having finished with Leovigild for now, Henry turns his attention back to finishing off what's left of Burgundy. It looks reachable, even with the Hungarian sightseers in the way. All of the lost cities in Hawaii are back in Gogorio's hands. Even if Singapore's wild attack doesn't leave any physical evidence, it still shows that even the biggest powers on the cylinder can bleed. Big Bend flips again, the time loop goes on. Big Bend flips again, the time loop goes on. Big Bend flips again, the time loop goes on. Big Bend flips again, the time loop goes on. Big Bend flips again, the time loop goes on. Thomas Peters takes back Palencia and burns it down in a fit of rage. A small flock of privateers is also making a serious dent in Barcino. Finally, we get a better view of Tom's Point. Rows upon rows of musketmen march relentlessly toward Chete. Ludwig isn't taking any chances now that Bathory is within his grasp. Not only have the Osage's gains been undone, but now their founded city of Pahyukka is under threat, already blasted into the red by the relentless bombers of the north. It happened easily in Latvia. Ulmanis was already dictator of the militarized country, so few of the downtrodden populace cared or even noticed as more and more of the many citadel commanders were replaced in their duties by the immortal Ulmanis. The dictator saw enemies on every side, and the only ally he could rely on was himself, as he always had. Both of the final pair of Shang cities have been bombed into the black. Gwanggaito seems to have forgotten to actually advance a melee unit, however. Pahuska achieves peace with the Kaicho, barely saving Pahyukka. Unfortunately for any future Osage aspirations, the Yellowknives look to take ownership of the string of citadels leading into their capital. If this war was any indicator, the Yellowknives will also be much better at using it than the Pueblo were. Cannon and boats clash in the ruins of Palencia. However, the navy attacking Barcino only swells greater, and the city seems like it could also fall. We also get a proper look at King Tom's Point. With a shot of the Khoshut Empire as a whole, we can see that the former Harappan cities are being integrated well, but the army needs thickening. Both Bukhara and the Afsharids are also invading the Khoshuts, by the way, but no cities are taking damage yet. But come to think of it, Gushi might not have been able to capitalize on the chance to retake Lhasa if he'd stuck himself in the southeast attacking Siam. Maybe all those turns of doing nothing in the coalition were actually a galaxy-brained play to provoke the Dzungars into attacking him, not committing any units so they'd be ready for Lhasa. Food for thought. The Nungar and Vijayanagaran fleets clash in the Indian Ocean. Yagan brings the stronger firepower here, but a lot of his units are embarked, and Vijayanagara has a lot more reserves on defense before they'll be fighting on land. Oh dear. Even in just the small slice of land around Minj, the Wagi forces outshine Nungars in both quality and quantity. Maybe Yagan should focus on his home instead of attempting cross-continental attacks. Hustus makes peace with Bora Bora, somehow escaping with his capital. Ecuador could still take it, but with only 3 tiles to work with and Bora Boran units in the way, it's possible that it's beyond Moreno. No soul could sleep in Pampacoani. The fishing boats lay in pieces at the bottom of the sea, and the fields were run through with weeds and ashes. Just as the last ramshackle walls crumbled under piratical cannon fire, the news finally arrived from the north. The city had been turned over to Bora Bora for peace. The only thing to be done now was to get back to fishing, farming, and making merry, just as they had before. The Antarctic cities of Warrawilka and Pikwalakta are also given to Bora Bora for peace. Tiwanaku is left now with only a capital and one under attack. We get a shot of the great Zhang Empire. Burned by his past loss against Wagi, Koxinga has carpeted his seas hard, wary of the naval powers to his south and east. However, his land, in contrast, is starkly empty, and I don't know how much resistance Zheng could provide if Goguryeo decides to keep expanding south once it's finished with the corpse of Shang. Kazan has a similarly sparse land carpet, but with no impressive navy to make up for it. They're just bad. The only saving grace for Makshamadamin is his fortuitous surroundings. The Selkups would have to work through the Urals, Latvia is similarly lacking in units, and Makhnovia and the Kalmyks are even worse than Kazan is. We get a shot of Mexico next, a once powerful contender that's been fairly inactive for a while. Their land carpet is good, and their stats are strong. Now would be the perfect time to slurp up the remains of Pueblo, or even to make an attack on the wounded or distracted Osage or Ecuador. For a top-tier power, New Holland has been fairly unimpressive, riding to the top off strong stats alone. They appear to have left their core empty to migrate an army through Ecuadorian territory. They seem to be on good terms with Mexico, given the open borders, so maybe Taino is the target here? Pontus next, who've made various moves throughout the game, demonstrating themselves as a solid mid-tier power. They are blessed with plenty of soft targets, Makhnovia, Kalmyks, Bavaria, Karmatians, and they could probably put a dent in the Afsharids too, if they wanted to. Next up, Palawa. They had a strong start, but seem to have become boxed in, having no success in war with Nungar or Bora Bora, despite repeated attempts. Honestly, their best bet for expansion might be Tehuelche, which doesn't bode too well. The Selkups are next on the list. For having been recently able to intimidate the Dzungars into giving up their gains, the army shown here doesn't seem too overwhelming. For our fish-loving friends, the best target might be Mongolia again. There's some pretty harsh terrain in all directions, really, so the actual best plan for expansion here is probably to unlock plains. With a shot of the Yellowknife Corps, we can see that the Great Southern Conquest might be very successful, but it has also drained the north of units. If the Pharaohs woke up, they could probably secure the coastal city of Pitwelta at minimum. The Wagi Corps now, showing off a terrifying tech lead. The only weakness they have is that their unit composition is heavily slanted toward the land, while they will need to attack by sea on most fronts. But that won't slow them down too much were they to move. Their planes are concentrated in the west. Perhaps Zheng should be scared. Time for some mega map slides. Here's the cylinder in its newest state, showing off the momentous southern conquests of both Goguryeo and the Yellowknives of late, as well as the growing proportion of South America controlled by Bora Bora. The only nations at peace are the Pharaohs, Sabad Emmet, Iko Iki, and Bora Bora. I believe this one shows a civilization's food situation. Tiwanaku, the Visigoths, Royal Hungary, Makhnovia, and Pueblo are all understandably struggling to feed themselves, but they are interestingly joined by the Finns, Kalmyks, Afsharids, and Siam. The Nivkh, Mexico, and Taino are all booming. Ecuador, Sierra Leone, and the Ume Sami are all mired in unhappiness. Among others, Goguryeo and Bora Bora are celebrating their conquests with a golden age. Now this one is interesting. Most of the world is text key legend JFD, as you'd expect, but the large powers of the Pharaohs and Bora Bora are text key legend JFD. Things are even worse for some of the tiny nations. The Finns, Alawites, Kalmyks, Makhnovia, and Royal Hungary are all text key legend JFD. The religions of the world are reaching their furthest extents, with only a few pockets of land left, likely being converted back and forth. Back to the action, Chete is down to the red, and it seems that Elizabeth Bathory's end is nigh. A settler tries to flee to the east, but will need to get through hostile Machnovia to be free. It happened silently in Ndongo. The long stagnant empire of Ndongo and Matamba had grown numb to the world, the populace not caring who stood for them in the Senate. No one even noticed when the names on the ballots weren't real anymore, or when all the decrees of government were signed by Nzinga. Eventually, even the pretense was dropped, and only the immortal stood at the head of Ndongo, just as it had been when it all began. It happened bloodily in Osage. Stumped and stymied at every turn, Pahuska's anger with the rest of the government grew more and more. With every lost battle, with every undone advance, the commander in charge was executed, and the immortal stepped in, grasping the strands of his country like a spider weaving its web, until, eventually, the sole leader in the lands of the Osage was once again Pahuska. The Sierra Leone Navy sweeps into Barcino, setting it alight as well. Seeing as all the Visigoths have to defend the city with is a settler, it seems unlikely to flip. Lhasa falls into the red, and the Kossuths are holding off the western aggressors pretty well, too. Surprisingly competent here, given their reputation. Great work. In the final slide of this week's episode, Ishtar uncovers the designs that Kenyo has on Siam. Perhaps he has heard they're stuck in a difficult war. If he wants to do anything, however, he's on the wrong side of Zheng to reach there. And I've been Rose, brought to you by Doc Ito, and thanks for listening. Good night.